everyone, welcome back to Houseplants Gone Wild. My name is Kelly. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of repotting for spring. As you can see, I've got a snake plant. This has been in here for about 2 years. It's at the perimeter of the pot. I've got a string of pearls that's been in here for about 2 years, and I've taken tons of cuttings, but I noticed the other day it's quite root bound. So going to be giving that a little bit more room, as well as I have some cuttings, like this is a little Maranta, just put it in this pot, and I'm having a hard time just trying to keep that soil a little bit moist because it's quite small. It's also in more of an aeroid mix that's good for wicking away moisture, as well as the terracotta pots. So I'm going to be changing that up. I also have a big pot here with a bunch of Monstera cuttings. I don't know if you remember in my last video, one of them I had a 7-foot tall Monstera that I got. I just sort of cut it up and got a whole bunch of plants from it. This one, they were all rooted, and I stuck them in a pot hoping they would root a little bit faster, and they did, but it's still in quite a large pot, and it's sort of holding on to that moisture a little bit longer than I'd like, so I'm going to probably divide it up a little bit more and change out the pot. As well as that pot is quite large, so I'm going to use that one for the Chef Lara I have, which is in sort of the same potting medium. It's more so for aeroids. It's wicking away a little bit too quickly for this plant. This one also needs a bigger pot, and I'll give it some fresh soil. So that's pretty much it for the video today. We'll just be repotting. Hope you guys enjoy. Feel free to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit that notification bell. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below, or you can reach me at Instagram, my Houseplants Gone Wild. Okay, so to start off, we'll go with the Marantas. So these two, they like to sort of have that soil a little bit on the more moist side. They don't like to quite fully dry out. They can withstand it, but you can start to notice a lot of brown edging on the leaves. So like this is a small cutting here, and started noticing that the leaves are quite sort of wilted feeling, and they're starting to get quite brown, and I can feel this is very, very light. You can see in the soil lots of perlite. It's not bad for when you're starting a freshly rooted cutting. These were both water propagations. But one thing you want to kind of consider is some plastic pots. So I just reuse all my plastic pots. And yeah, this one is quite a bit smaller. I think this is maybe a 4-inch, and I'm moving it up to a 5. No, I'm not too sure. But you can see they're a little bit bigger, and this one here is quite root bound. So let's start with this one. First thing you want to do, kind of just loosen it up. I like to water my plants sort of the day before I do this usually. I don't always get around to it. And one thing you can do is when you pull your plant out, is kind of tip it over into your new pot. Because one thing I've noticed is perlite tends to float over time to the top of the soil, and that just acts as extra drainage. So if you have that at the bottom of your pot, you kind of have a little bit more of a sort of a savior at the bottom there to keep that extra moisture from just sort of compacting at the bottom of your new pot. So as you can see here, it is quite root bound. Those roots are starting to coil and don't want to suffocate it. So yeah, so we'll just put that in here. I have with me a general potting mix. I ran out of coco coir, so I just had to pick up one of those big bales of soil the other day. And then I added some extra worm castings for some nutrients and a little bit extra perlite. I do have a little bit of the coco coir aeroid mix with me. It's got orchid bark, it's got perlite, and coco coir and worm castings. So those are just the ingredients that I add for that one. Keep it kind of simple, but with that coco coir, I find it holds on to moisture a lot longer, and it adds better air to the soil. So what you do is you can have your plant in there, and I always like to just kind of wiggle them up a little bit, so that way the soil runs down the side of the pot, pulls some of those roots downward, and helps to sort of loosen things up a little bit. And then I just sort of repack the top a little bit and add some more soil. There we go. So it's still got some room on the top of the soil there, so when you water it, it's not going to come flooding over the sides. I'll water that in a little bit here. And the next one will be this, I think they call it a rabbit foot Maranta. But once again, you know, it's quite dry. I'm going to use terracotta here. One of the leca beads in there. So yeah, so you can pull off while you're doing this some of like that old dry leaves. Just going to dump a little bit of soil in there and pull straight up. Wow. So not a whole lot of roots on this plant, but it's still quite dry. And so one thing you want to be mindful of is making sure your plants, like this one, they're not fully drying out. Most of them won't handle that so well. So same thing, you want to work that soil in so you can just sort of poke around the sides, not compacting it too much, making sure that any roots that are sticking out of the soil, they get covered and put into the soil and buried. You don't want them drying out. That can be a little bit hard on the plant. Lost a leaf. So sometimes it happens when you repot. You can just check it. Luckily that was one of the leaves on the lower end of the stems, so didn't have a whole lot, didn't have any roots or anything, but usually over time plants will sort of kill off the older growth if they're, you know, if they have any moment of stress or even just to make room for new growth. So yeah, there we have it. So one thing I also like to do with plants is I sort of transition them from one pot, move them up in a little bit of a bigger pot, and then I'll just at the same time have another plant ready to sort of take that spot, just so that all the plants can have a chance to get a little bit more space. One of the plants that I also wanted to repot today was a Monstera Deliciosa Thai Constellation. So I have moisture meter in there. I've been trying to watch it closely, more closely I should say. I did just water it yesterday, but I've been having sort of an issue trying to keep that soil moist. When I first got it, I was very hesitant to overwater this plant, so I made sure I added lots of perlite, and I ended up adding so much perlite and then I ran out of coco coir, and so the mixture that it's in is very fibrous, lots of coco coir, but lots of perlite, so it's really struggling to hang on to any moisture at all, and I'm finding I have to almost water the plant all the time, or it's not holding on to water and nutrients enough that it can grow. So the more you water, if you're having to water a plant all the time, whether it's root bound or the soil mixture just isn't right, you can actually deplete the nutrients in the soil, as well as get a buildup of harsh salts or anything. Like you can see this pot here, it's quite sort of like powdery or white. That's just the salt from our tap water. And I try not to water with tap water. I like to use rainwater or distilled, but in the winter time, don't have any of that. So yeah, this is actually an old badminton sort of pole that you stick into the ground in your yard. And I stuffed some coco coir in there, and then I wrapped it with coco coir and jute rope around it, and I drilled a bunch of holes all the way up. So when you water it, you can put water in there and it leaks from the side and sort of holds on to some moisture, and that kind of acts as like almost like an attractant for aerial roots. They can attach that, they can get some water, some moisture and nutrients that way. So if you want to give it a try, feel free. I've done it for a few of my plants. So this is going to be a little messy. Let's make some room here. Let's check these roots out. So I did just water this one, yes, day before yesterday. So the soil's fairly moist right now. Let's give it a little shake here. Seeing some sort of thicker, more like tuberous roots, sort of like your water searchers, I guess, and they hold on to water a little bit more. I've heard that these thicker roots are for water and the thinner ones are more for nutrients in the soil. So yeah, that's the root system so far. It is in kind of a bigger pot, I guess. Like the root system isn't that developed for the pot size, but who knows? I'd rather have it in too big of a pot when I'm repotting it than too small of one, because otherwise next year or less, I'll have to repot it anyways, so. Okay, let's change this soil. Okay, so I put a little bit of soil at the bottom. First thing I want to put in is my moss pole, so that way I'm not damaging the root system when I put the plant in. You can just kind of lean it up on the side, and then put your plant. I like to put them so that way they're kind of, you can tell this plant's sort of leaning towards the light, which would be up this way. All the leaves are more so facing one direction, so I like to have it so that those leaves are facing the direction of the moss pole, so that way it sort of leans up against it as it grows towards the light. So I'm going to put it in there. I'm going to put in a little bit of my general soil, some of the, this is the more aeroid mix cocoa coir, and then just kind of working it around the roots, and then grab your plant and gently kind of give it a little bit of a shake up and down, and you'll see that soil start to sort of sink lower into the pot. You don't want to be squishing the plant down and compacting that soil down there, but I find that sort of helps to work soil into and around the root system, gives it better support, and fills in sort of any of those like gaps. One thing with Monsteras is they are epiphytic, I think it's called. So they in nature, they will hit up against a tree as they're growing, kind of like what this moss pole provides. And they just start to climb up. They get usually larger leaves and more fenestrations. The more they go up, the sort of nicer the foliage is. There, that should do. So that's that. And, wow. So we'll set this one aside. Like I said, give it a good douse of water. Make sure that you water it thoroughly, all your plants, after you've repotted them, so that way they can start adjusting to their new home. So I guess Monstera, it's kind of controversial. Some people say, oh, you have to use a very aeroid mix, lots of drainage, lots of sort of, what do you call it, orchid bark, things like that. You can, but it also depends on how much attention you want to be giving your plants, what kind of pot they're in. Terracotta wicks away super quickly. If it's like this one here, painted terracotta, it sort of holds on to that moisture a little bit longer. So what I'm going to do with this pot, it's got probably a dozen cuttings in it. So I'm just going to take those cuttings out, shake off some of the soil, and yeah, get ready to reuse this pot for the Chef Lara. So. This is all those cuttings, and these are all those roots. Quite a bit, but they're all sort of mushed together, growing into one another. You know, like this is one of those cuttings. It is bone dry. It wasn't getting enough water, whereas some of these other ones, they're getting a lot of water. So this one, it's kind of wilted. I might just sacrifice that one. But some of these other ones, like this one here, look at those nice roots. Nice foliage, fenestrated. So that one, I'm probably just gonna put it in its own pot and sell it, to be honest. I have more than enough Monstera. Don't really need, you know, more than, I think I have 2 that I want to keep, so. But right now, I'm just gonna kind of separate them and figure out what's what. I have a whole bunch of these little cheap plastic pots, and I'm just gonna take each one of these cuttings that has roots and is healthy, and I'm just gonna start putting them all in their own pot. Okay, so as you can see behind me, there's a whole bunch of Monstera cuttings in these little 6-inch plastic pots. I put roughly around 2 cuttings in each pot, and I have 6 pots. And that's not all of them. This is the other sort of big one. Those are the roots. Nice big foliage. I haven't quite figured out where I'm gonna put this one. I have a whole bunch of terracotta pots that are this size, quite big, and smaller ones. And though they like to be a little bit root bound, this is too small, way too small. This might fit in this larger pot. I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do for shuffling, but in the meantime, I'm gonna set this aside, transplant some of these other plants, and then I'll figure out where I'm gonna put this one. So this one's a little bit harder to get into frame. I'll just slowly lower it down. You can see how tall it is. So it's shoulder height, so about 5 feet, I guess. But anyways, I am going to be repotting this one, most likely into this bigger pot here. I do also have one that is quite a bit taller, but about the same diameter. So I'll probably save this one for something else. But in the meantime, like I said, all this perlite, it comes to the top. This is that very sort of aroid mixture. Lots of orchid bark, it's very loose. Good drainage, but yeah, so we're not gonna use that soil. Sorry I'm not in the frame, but it's kind of hard with this plant, limited space. Hope you can hear me okay. Don't have a microphone for my videos. Oof. So I'm just sort of grabbing the stem, using my wrists as sort of an anchor and pulling it out gently. Let's see where we're at. So yeah, it's a little bit root bound. You can see some of those roots, they're not overly root bound, but it's gonna be nice to give it some fresh soil, something that holds on to that moisture a little bit better. I'm just gonna work this stuff off a little bit here. This is why it's kind of nice to water your plants before you repot them, because that soil dries out and it sort of stays compact and sort of cork-like. So I'm just gonna get my fingers in there, kind of break up some of that soil, trying not to damage the roots. It's not overly compact, the soil. The nice thing about coco coir is it doesn't usually like dry and become too firm. I have noticed that with perlite, or not perlite, peat moss, it can do that. And I've tried in the past to sort of transition all my potting to just coco coir. From what I've found anyways, kind of controversial, but is better for the environment, just sort of more eco-friendly when it comes to methods of getting the actual material itself, because peat moss comes from sort of those marshy bogs. There's some up here in Canada and just around the world, and over time, vegetables plant growth, it grows on top and then compresses and compacts down below underneath this sort of marshy land, and that right there is where you get the peat moss. But in order to get it, most of the times it has to be all dug up. So, and that destroys sort of the ecosystem that lives both on the surface and underneath. Now I'm seeing the soil here that's way down inside, and it's the soil that I'm pretty sure a nursery used for this plant, and it is dry, and I can't really really, it's not a soil that I use, that's for sure. I don't even know what to do with all this soil. Maybe I can go like that. That'll work. There. So got my little cup, I got my fresh soil. So I'm just gonna start filling a little bit in the bottom here. There we go. Just a little bit. And now this guy. There we go. Plop it in. I can see that it's still quite compact on the one side, so I'm just gonna give it a little bit of a massage, break up some of those roots that are very dried and compacted. There we go. So just set it in there. Get your fresh soil. Start dumping it in all the way around. One thing I have found with repotting is it's good to dump your soil around the whole thing, because if you dump it in only on one side, it starts to push all those roots to the opposite side. And you also might end up with a sort of a lopsided plant. So yeah. And not too much coming out the drainage hole. Sometimes with plants, you know, if you have a drainage hole that's quite, you know, big with some of these pots, like this one, it's quite big, you can put a little bit of a mesh down below, so that way when each time you water, it doesn't just flood out with dirt. So yeah, let's put this down here. Next up is the split rock cactus. So I'm going to use, I like this little cactus pot, I think it's cute, and this has really good drainage. It's kind of a shallow pot, but it fits perfectly in there. So that's where this one will be going. If you have other cacti and succulents that are maybe pointy or delicate or sharp, you can grab another pot, maybe not one this size. So let's say this is a cactus. You want to use something a little bit thicker than these thin plastic ones. All you're going to do is flip it upside down, like so, and then you wouldn't have to touch it. You would just put your soil in, put your plant back in your new pot. This cactus has been in here for quite some time. And you can see down below, oh, I had one of those mesh things to kind of keep the roots up and in, but it's quite compact. So I'm just gonna gently sort of, you don't even have to really do much. Cactus soil is quite loose. So I'm just gonna get a little bit of cactus mix here. So for a cactus mix, it's got a little bit more perlite, some sand in it. It looks fairly similar to the other stuff I've been using. So the last plant that I had in here had it was the golden barrel cactus, and it actually pushed the center part out, so now it kind of teeters a little bit. So I'm just gonna try not to overdo it, over compact the soil here. Put a little bit down, put your cactus in, or succulent I guess this is, and then just work the soil around. The nice thing about cacti and succulents, you can decorate the soil surface quite nicely. It doesn't seem to bother them at all. Some plants, when you put like rocks and things on the soil surface, it compacts the soil a lot. It also, sometimes in doing that, it can hold in more moisture. So some plants don't like it, but then for cacti and succulents, they don't seem to mind it. And they don't really have that crazy of a root system, so you don't often have to worry about the roots getting damaged or anything. So yeah, that's probably what I'll do with this one. Put some nice decorative rocks around there. With the same mixture, I'm going to do the string of pearls. So these ones, it's kind of nice to sort of not tangle them too much. I'm just going to put a little bit of soil at the bottom. This one I did water, I think today, so hopefully it comes out quite smoothly. This has been in there quite some time, so I'm going to use the back of the spoon just to kind of go right down the side, give a little push. Do that a couple spots. Wow, I can feel that it is lots of roots in there. There we go. Wow, so this is very root bound for succulent. They don't mind it, but oof. There's like no soil. Like look at those. Don't know if you can see them. Those are all just roots, and it is like hard. Lots of perlite in there, which I'm gonna, or not, yeah, perlite. So I'm just gonna reuse some of that. I'm just gonna break it up a little bit. Succulents, kind of like Hoyas, they don't have a very strong or like thick root system. They're quite thin. So just be mindful of when you're taking out some of that soil. Okay, so I got some soil in the bottom of my pot, just about an inch high, and I'm just gonna put this in. What I'm gonna do, it's all on one side of the pot. And there's a gap here, so I'm just gonna put a little bit of soil in there. And then I wanna flip it to the other side and get soil down on this side. So that way there's always some soil in between the roots and the sides of the pot. There we go, just kind of work it in. Could have done a larger pot, but meh. This will be fine for now. They don't grow crazy root systems, like I said, like the Hoyas. So you don't want too much pot space either. Too much pot space and then you hang on to so much excess moisture. Okay. Gonna have to spend some time untangling this. Oh my goodness. The other thing you can do is the top here, it's been messed with a little bit with transplanting it, so I have a little bit of loose soil. I'm just gonna put it right in the center and just kind of sprinkle it around, give it a little shake, and then when I water it, that water is gonna kind of push that soil around the surface a little bit, and any sort of roots that are really tiny and sticking up in the soil, they'll get some coverage there. Oh, there's even an old flower. That's the Senecio string of pearls flower. Just looks kind of like an old dandelion. So yeah, there we go. Put it in a little saucer. And that one is done. So one thing I did notice when I was looking behind me here, this is that large Monstera, and I think the root system, though it's kind of small for this pot, it might be actually okay. So this is that dead one. Compost. Yeah, I think this is a pot for this one. If it doesn't really like it, I'll just be sure not to overwater it. This is quite a large pot. It's kind of painted. A lot of the paint's chipping off. It's kind of old. But you want to be mindful of when you're putting kind of a smaller root system, smaller plant in a larger pot like this, it's going to hold on to moisture a lot longer. So I'll be sure not to water this one, put it in a nice bright spot, give it all the love that it needs, and hopefully it won't suffer too much. Okay, once again, get your potting mix. I just kind of mixed in that aeroid mixture with some general potting soil, and that's what I'm going to use for this because, it should be fine. I ran out of coco coir and I just using a generic soil. Sorry about the length of this video. I just realized, with all these plants, me kind of going on a rant, that's a little bit too much soil. It's kind of long, so I'll be sure to do some good editing. Try to anyways. All right. So put this down in the pot. One thing you can also do if your plant is kind of a smaller root system, rather than planting it up here, just put some soil at the bottom and let it kind of sit instead of soil level here, have the soil level down here, like it's okay. And then in a couple years or a year or two, when you go to give it a bigger pot, all you have to do is take it out of the pot, add some more soil at the bottom, in and around, and just raise that soil level, because coming up the pot will give it more diameter and more depth. So I've done that for a couple plants and it seems to work. So there you have it. Pretty big pot, but one day a pretty big plant. Maybe. And the last plant for today is this snake plant. It is really not that root bound, not like I thought. You know what? We're gonna give it a little bit of a smaller pot until those roots develop a little bit more. So now the fun part, cleaning up. So with this snake plant, I noticed that the roots were not really developed. It's in, or was in, this pot, which is quite deep. And it's the same diameter as this pot, just less deep. So the roots, I want to give them some time to sort of develop in some nice soil. I just changed out the soil. Because of its depth, it was holding on to a little bit too much water. So I had to make sure that they're not sitting in damp soil for too long. So, and I always suggest using terracotta for snake plants. So yeah, give that some water. So that's pretty much it for this video today. Thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Sorry it was a little bit long. I'll try and do some cutbacks here and there on the sort of long spiels. But yeah, if you have any questions about how I sort of transplant all the plants or the soil that I use or anything like that, feel free to comment down below. And yeah, thanks again for watching. This is Houseplants Gone Wild.